Coming up next on Invested with Purpose is filmmaker and director Tim Mahoney. Tim joins us today to discuss his new movie, The American Miracle, which hits theaters this June 9th through 11th. Stick around and hear more about the film, but also watch this preview.
I came to persuade you to avoid these dangers.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
If our union is to hold together, something must be done.
He will become founder of a mighty empire.
The fate of unborn millions now depends under God upon the conduct and courage of this army.
Various founders talked about this providential experiment that God had ordained and intervened at this unique moment in American history to make all of this happen.
Most of them believed that there were no accidents in history.
That hope for liberty was the light that under God, He would lead them.
All eyes are open or opening to the rights of man.
Am I all mankind?
We have been assured, sir, in the sacred writings, that except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it.
It cannot be denied that with America and in America, a new era commences in human affairs.
America is something that I hold in my heart.
Americans of today should regain our bearings, that our nation is no accident.
Thank you for joining us today on Invested with Purpose, making the most out of our time, talent, and treasure. I'm Cara.
And I am Brian.
And today we have Tim Mahoney with us. We met Tim at NRB, and he was presenting the preview for his film, An American Miracle. And he's here with us to talk a little bit about that and his faith journey and a little bit about patterns of evidence. And we are just so very thankful to have you on the show today, Tim. Thank you.
Well, I'm so happy to be here. And I believe that, purpose is what, God's called us to be a part of, is to, what is our purpose? And part of that is being an American here and telling the story of our nation. And I'm so blessed to be able to have had the privilege to share the story with others.
Outstanding.
Well, maybe we can just dive right in and you can help our audience to get to know you a little bit better. So can you tell us about your faith journey, just a little bit about that, and what led to Christian filmmaking for you?
Well, I grew up in a Christian home, and I grew up in Twin Cities. My mother was a music teacher, and my father was a police officer. And my dad had been, he lost his mother. He was there when his mother was dying, and that was traumatic. And then he was later abused, and then went off to the Korean War and was in a very famous battle called Pork Chop Hill. And so he had a lot of anger. And so my parents' marriage was very, very difficult. My mother was a wonderful, sweet person. And I remember praying at different times with my mom and my three siblings on our knees for God's protection. And I made a film called The Journey Home that tells this story. And so when people say, well, why did you care so much about the Bible being true? It had to do with the fact that, at around 9 years old, when my family was breaking apart, I was the eldest child. I saw my mother and her faith, and she put a great amount of faith in the Bible, in God's word, that the Lord would protect us and guide us and help us through a very difficult time. And eventually my family broke apart. And as a single parent, my mother went back to the Bible. We used to sit down in something called family devotions. I don't know if anybody remembers that terminology. When you asked the question about, being interested in films, and I was 18 years old when I went to see my first movie, because we didn't go to movies as a kid. My family didn't go to a theater. But I had heard about a movie by Billy Graham called The Hiding Place.
Yeah.
And some people might know the story. And so that movie, when it came out, I asked if I could have permission from my mom if I could go see it. And it's the story of Corrie ten Boom and their family hid Jewish people in their home in Holland. That storyline was the first experience I had with a big movie in a theater. And I saw that movie 3 times in 1 week.
Wow. Okay.
That led me, I think, to an interest in film.
A calling. Well, your Patterns of Evidence series is truly groundbreaking. So when we ran into you at NRB, just a little side note, my studio assistant Joe was with, if you remember, and he stopped me in the middle of the aisle and he was like, "Cara, do you have any idea? Patterns of Evidence, this is incredible. This is my favorite." And so he was like, "We have to stop." And so that's when we stopped and met you and then learned about your newest film. But it's truly groundbreaking. So what inspired you to explore the connection between biblical history and archaeology?
Well, that was a surprise to me as much as anyone, even though I did love history. In high school, I started reading about history, and that became a wake-up call for me that there were things that happened that were very exciting and interesting earlier in history. And I started reading my history book like it was a novel almost. But then as I grew older, I was actually involved with helping. I felt like God was calling me to make films. And I didn't know exactly how to do that or what it would look like. And there are a lot of people today that probably have the same similar interest in movies because they're so powerful. The stories are so powerful. And God created us, by the way, for story. And so I was found some people, International Christian Visual Media. It's called ICVM. It wasn't in the beginning called that, but I went to those annual conferences. And it was in that time that I heard about someone searching for evidence of the Exodus. And I thought, well, I'll help them if I can. And that began what has now been almost 25 years of searching for a very unique approach called a pattern of evidence for the Bible. And it has worked so well for both Christian and non-believers because I just asked the question, can we find evidence of this event of the Exodus of the Israelites out of Egypt? Is there evidence that Moses wrote the Bible? Is there evidence of the sea parting at the Red Sea? And, and we would come up with a pattern and then we would search for it. And I would give alternative different viewpoints. And that began, like I said, the last 25 years of making that style of investigative filmmaking.
I like how you started this whole thing. You said, why is it important to prove that the Bible is true and the stories can be validated and stuff like that? And I think so much goes into that because, as a young kid myself, the whole thought process as you go through as a kid, like, can there literally fit all the animals on the ark? How is this possible? Did God really flood the entire earth? All these big
Can someone be swallowed by a whale?
Yeah, all these really big things, these big stories that are central to my faith and to our faith. And what I really like is the fact that you're putting it in film because it becomes much more entertaining that way and much more riveting. What have you found, if just one thing that's like truly surprised you?
Well, I think one of the first ones was Joseph, the story of Joseph that was found, the pattern of evidence in Egypt was amazing. And that was when I had gone to Egypt, to the location where the early Israelites were. And I went there, went around the other side of the world, very difficult to get there. And sometimes had to lay down on the floor of a van to get in through these areas, and wasn't exactly safe at times. Being an American, this is after 9/11. And when I got there, I asked if there was any evidence for the Exodus. And Dr. Manfred Vitek, Egyptologist Manfred Vitek said, so far not. And that caused me to have a crisis of faith. I was sitting in the edit suite, and it was sort of sometimes I think your audience needs to know this. There are things that are said that the enemy can use to continue to erode your confidence in the Bible. And I want to just say this for different people. Be careful, because there are times when you don't have all the information.
Right.
And when he said so far not, I believed that there wasn't any evidence. But I found out later that he couldn't really say there is evidence, because it was dangerous for him to say there is evidence of the Israelites, because they were connected to the nation of Israel. And when you're in Egypt and you've got extremism and things like that going on, it can be very dangerous for you to talk about those things. I want to share something with you. Later on, he when I met him again in Jerusalem, he showed me evidence.
Oh, wow.
You know, it was like 10 years later, and it was a powerful experience because he found the location of Geshem. But I went home and had this moment of a crisis of faith where I felt that dark thought that there was no possible evidence, and I felt hopeless. But then at the same moment, another thought came into my mind and said, stop editing, go to your office. You know, it's like God was speaking to me. And I went to my office, and there was a book that someone had given me earlier. It was like, the thought was like, go to your bookcase. And I went there, and it was like, that book, read that book. I pulled it out, and there I opened it up. It was by David Rohl, Pharaohs and Kings. And it was the story of Joseph at the same location that Manfred Bitek was digging. And it was, so underneath where the city of Ramesses is, there's another city below. So when the Bible talks about the Israelites being in the city of Ramesses, building those cities, there's what we have to know is that archaeology is layers of time. And the deeper you go into a different time period. And that's where the story of Joseph and Jacob and the Israelites beginning in Egypt was to be found. And for me, what was amazing is they can see that there was just nothing there, and then this small group of people come, just like the Bible says. And they have about the right amount of houses for the people. And then they grow. But what's very interesting is there is a palace there with a pyramid tomb. But and a pyramid tomb was only given to very high-ranking, like pharaohs and the queens of Egypt, and it wasn't something that anybody normally had. So this wasn't something that that a non-Egyptian would have, but the person who lived in that palace and was buried in the tomb was not Egyptian, and he had a statue, and his statue had many colors, and he was an Asiatic, like you would be if you were a Jewish person, an Israelite. And there were other primary tombs there too, 11 of them. So when you look at the different connections, we have someone who's not Egyptian, resembling in many ways a character of Joseph, and then we have 11 other tombs, principal tombs around that could be his brothers.
I was going to say, where my thoughts went, right there. So Tim, I imagine that you probably get pushback from people.
Oh, I can imagine.
People that aren't Christians, or maybe they say maybe you're making this stuff up, or maybe you're taking too many leaps of faith to get to somewhere, or something like that. What kind of pushback do you get for these kind of things?
Well, fortunately I haven't seen as much, because what in the style of the filmmaking that I'm doing is I'm hearing the pushback in the movie.
Oh.
So what I'm doing is I'm inviting in the pushback. So I'm saying, okay, for example, if someone says this didn't happen, I have to say, well, why? Can you explain to me why you don't see evidence for the Israelites? And I'll hear the different points of view. So when you make a film that has more of a documented multiple points of view, it allows the audience to be able to listen to the information differently. Otherwise, their guard is up.
All right.
And I think there's some inspiration in the revealing of God acting in history that people are longing for. And that's been the technique that we've been using.
I like that.
I'm not saying there isn't pushback, but I'm saying that I've tried to include it right in the movie.
It's very smart. So, Tim, your upcoming film, An American Miracle, is going to be premiering in theaters June 9th through 11th. And Could you please give us a little bit of a preview or some insight into what to expect from this particular film? A little bit about the story and what you were
Yes.
envisioning as far as the message.
Absolutely. The American Miracle is a movie that's coming out. It's an epic investigation. It's a docudrama, but heavy on drama. And it's from Michael Medved. He's written a New York Times bestseller. And he
Yes.
asked me if I would help him tell the story of God's providential hand on America's founding and through American history. And I prayed about it, and I was able to pull together a great team. I've got Ralph Augstros and Doug Maddox as my executive producers as well, and I directed it. And we have a cast of about 90 people and about 300 extras where we recreate the history from 1750, the early life of George Washington. And George Washington, we're going to show you in one of the battles, the Battle of Monongahela, where many of the British were killed, the officers, except for George Washington. And he was a very big young man. And he had multiple bullet holes through his clothes. His hat was shot off. 2 horses were shot, and they couldn't kill him. This, we're going to show you that whole story of, a supernatural protection that George Washington had. And he was then prophesied over by one of the chiefs that was in that battle. And he prophesied that he would be a leader of a great nation. We show all that. We tell the story that leads us up to the American Revolution. And then we show you examples of George Washington and the Continental Army being spared from destruction multiple times by the British. And God was there. And that's why, I don't know if your audience knows this, but we're coming to the 250th anniversary of our nation. It's so important right now to know this forgotten story.
Well, I just watched it today, just before meeting with you today. It was absolutely beautiful. You don't see documentaries. You can tell it was loved. It was a passion project. Just from somebody who does editing, I do production myself. And also with documentaries, you don't typically see acting as well as this. You don't see sets that are as this beautiful. You don't see camera angles as artistic as this. So this was truly a work of love, and it's obvious that it was. So what do you really hope that viewers are going to take away from this film?
I think that, first of all, we've been testing the film, I think probably 2,000 to 3,000 people have seen it. And what they've told me is that I've never knew any of this before. I hope they take away a basic knowledge of our history that they never knew before. And that in that knowledge that they will see that our founding fathers weren't deists, as they, were kind of broad brush painted. There might have been a few of them, but a lot of them believed that God heard prayer and they saw God's presence acting in their safety and provision. And George Washington was one of them. This film, as you mentioned, we were able to be in many locations that were very significant. We were able to be at Mount Vernon, where George Washington lived. We were filming at George Washington's desk. This hadn't been done before, to my knowledge. We're filming at the Battle of Monongahela in the actual location with descendants of the native tribe that was in the battle. So many things that we're able to do. And when you say it's a passion project, I was so blessed to be able to be a part of this. And yes, we wanted this to stand the test of time, and that this film would encourage people and inspire people. And I think, as you know, the film tells the story of God's protection and providence, his presence in this nation. And I think that it's this film is not only to remember, but also there's a bit of a warning, as you know, on the end of the film, that we don't want to be a nation without God's involvement, and that we don't want to turn away from God as other nations have done.
Right.
Yeah, Tim, it's really interesting the way you put it. And you said that people come up and tell you they didn't know this. And I remember I went to Christian school when I was younger, and then public school later. I learned history. And then the first time I ever heard David Barton talk about history as a Christian historian, I sat there and I said, I don't remember this in school. I started to research some of it. And I'm like, yeah, this checks out. This is really true. And why is it, do you think, that people don't know this history of America in general?
I think overall there has been a diminishing of our past, and there's also been an editing and a revision of our past, because I think there's an intentionality in trying to not connect the dots to the past to people's true character. Many of these founders were people of faith, as I said, and they were depending upon the protection of God to help them through, creating a nation. And look at the nation the last 250 years. This nation has been, in many ways, a light. That's why people from around the world want to come here. And it's based on the Constitution. And Princeton's Robert George is speaking, and he speaks about, well, where did these ideas come from? That we have these inalienable rights. They come from the book of Genesis, that we are made in the image of God. And yet, in the book of Genesis, it also talks about the fact that we are fallen. So the founders understood the Bible, and they understood that this Constitution that they were creating, that we would live by, was something they were going to set as an ideal. And sometimes throughout the history of our nation, we haven't lived up to that. And that's what Robert George would say. The times we've failed is because we haven't lived up to it. It's not that the nation wasn't founded in the right way. It's that people are fallen and they don't follow the rules. And we can see that today.
Yeah.
Meaning there's a purpose for us to be here, and there's a purpose for us to do things even now. And I think that the film calls us to be responsible for our own generation right now.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a great call to action. And I wanted to ask, so now that you have finished this film and we're getting ready to premiere it and it's going out to the public, do you have ideas of where you'd like to go next in some of the documentaries and things that you're working on?
We have a plan to, we've got several different directions. One of them is we're continuing with the biblical investigations, but the American Miracle, there's probably 4 to 5 more films that will tell the rest of God's providential hand in America. We've left off here with the Constitution, but we're going to head our way right through the Louisiana Purchase and all the way through the Civil War. And then from there, there's the gold rush, and there's the acquisition of property and islands that will eventually help us in World War II with Midway. There's God's providential hand throughout America. And then there's the founding, and then there's, the Mayflower and what happened with the Pilgrims. And in between that is the story of the Great Awakening. By the way, people don't know this, and I never knew this, but Benjamin Franklin was a part of the Great Awakening.
Really?
He was friends with George Whitefield. He published his sermons. So there's so much that we don't know. And, the Bible says, you shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. This film is to encourage people. And Michael Medved would say it's to encourage people to be thankful for what God has given us.
That is so true. If there's one thing that's really missing in our culture today, it's thankfulness for all that God has blessed us with. And you see so often in our culture, especially in our youth and some that are misled and they're deceived into believing that our country was built by villains. And instead you see that truly it was godly men and women that were fighting, and they were given a vision. And just a side question I just wanted to ask you really quickly about George Washington. Was the actual actor that played George Washington there at NRB that day?
He was.
He was. I got a picture with George Washington that day. I got a picture with the president.
Yeah, his name is Daniel Shippey. He's a wonderful George Washington, and he's a historian himself. We have this company called Heroic Pictures, and it's about telling heroic stories of people that are virtuous and people of faith. And we need heroes today. We have stories today that are anti-heroes, and they're anti everything. The moral center of good has been flipped. And so people are eating and drinking stories that are actually, in my mind, I would say they're poisonous to their souls, poisonous to their minds. And they're consuming because they think, well, this is all I've got, and they get used to it. And what's important, I want your audience to know this, is that if you are fed the wrong kinds of stories, your programming in your brain and your heart and your soul will be wired poorly, and you're going to have a completely wrong mindset. And that's the reason why when we see people today that seem like, well, where did they get that idea? Well, they've been watching and consuming the wrong kinds of narratives.
It's the time old thing, the garbage in, garbage out, basically. Like
there you go.
That you'll repeat what you learn, and that's where we're both parents, and that's where our role as parents comes in. You know, he talks about George Washington and his struggles and how he barely lived, and there are a myriad of stories about other men and women that went through those things. And here we are. I'll complain if I don't have a hot shower, in the morning. Like the water heater didn't work or the power went out.
The Wi-Fi is running slow.
The Wi-Fi is running slow. And these are the people that gave me the privilege to have that. And yet I didn't take the time to learn about them. As kids especially, we've got to make sure they understand.
So very
Yes,
true.
absolutely.
Well, what can we do? How can we go about supporting Heroic Pictures? How can we go about making sure there are seats in those theaters? What are some ways that our viewers can support the film or your future films? Where can they go? What's your website?
The film tickets, first of all. Movie's going to be showing June 9, 10, 11, but you can buy the tickets right now. If you go to AmericanMiracleMovie.com, AmericanMiracleMovie.com, you can buy tickets. You can buy as many tickets as you want. And I would please buy them often and buy as many as you want and invite people to this because this is an important film that people need to see. And then Patterns of Evidence Foundation, if you go to Patterns of Evidence or even to American Miracle Movie, there's a donate button there. Patterns of Evidence Foundation. These films are expensive. They can take millions of dollars, but we're competing against billions of dollars. Billions and billions and billions of dollars have been endowed to tell the wrong kinds of stories. And we're working on telling the right kinds of stories because like I said, if you don't have the right story, you're going to believe a lie.
And you have God behind you because you are invested with purpose. So it's exactly why we wanted you on the show today, because the mission and everything that you're doing, that your life's work is exactly what, our guests represent here on the show, those that are making the most out of their time, talent, treasure to build the kingdom of heaven. So we thank you so much for joining us on the show today. We so appreciate you. And we thank you, as always, everyone watching, for tuning in with us on Invested with Purpose. We'll see you next time.
Invested with Purpose is brought to you by Timothy Partners Limited, advisor to the Timothy Plan Funds. Timothy Plan is a family of biblically responsible mutual funds and ETFs. For more information, please visit Timothy Plan's website at www.timothyplan.com. Some of our podcast guests may have a relationship with Timothy Partners Limited on behalf of Timothy Plan, including affiliations, partnerships, or sponsorships. However, guests are not compensated for their appearances, and their opinions do not constitute paid testimonials. Please be aware that investments carry risks and individual experiences may vary. Consult with a financial advisor for personalized advice.